my response might not fulfill the convention or expectation that I somehow feel is attached to this conventional format, whereby the second speaker is somehow expected to challenge or attempt to present an alternative position to that put forward by the main speaker, or at least somehow expected to disturb. For you, if anyone, Avital, and I know you won't mind me saying this, you are the disturber. And so, to disturb the disturber, what would that mean? To somehow seek to tidy up, or, I don't know, apply some kind of rigid categorization technique? I have no idea, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't suit me. Perhaps I have already imbibed, or to quote Roland Barthes, I have already marinated for too long in a form of disturbance. I have already mimetically learnt too much from it. I've always been at home in a kind of disturbance, certainly always tended towards the disturbers. And so being already disturbed myself, I don't immediately seek to escape disturbance. I feel no need to iron it out, and certainly not any need to nullify it. So it cannot be a case of disturbing the disturbance. To do so would clearly put me on the wrong side of everything. But maybe there might just be a case for interruption. Indeed, I see my purpose here as constituting rather than filling a gap. The kind of gap or pause that is required, or that one likes to indulge in, for example, after eating, especially after eating a little too much, and maybe a little bit too fast, or a little bit too slow. And we are, after all, on the final day of this jam-packed and quite overwhelming marathon of a conference. So consider me, if you will, like the coffee, or the somewhat outdated but oh so decadent cigarette d'après. I don't have the gravitas, nor even, to be honest, the aspiration to be a whiskey or a cigar. I'm a lightweight digestif. And the meal was good. Inhale. My purpose is to facilitate a pause, to take time to breathe, to exhale, fill the blood with oxygen, and give you time to formulate your responses and your comments. Let them come. But I will nevertheless make use, if not abuse, of this position of power that has been granted to me, and at least offer my Moutarde to the occasion, as the Germans say, sein Senf dazugeben. Avital, you touched on many issues in your talk. You drew the contours of a wide spectrum of different versions of complaint, from fussing to kicking to anguish, from squeaking, moaning, bitching and nagging, to pouting and sending out disturbed emissions. You mentioned sleeplessness, off-the-chart intensities, frazzled nerves between grief and subjection, the unstoppable fear of freak-out, the store of complaints that writing announces, writing as schreiben. For crying out loud, a relentless series of complaints. You also evoked various common sources and places of complaint. The family. Hello, Mum. She's up there. The school, theatre, university, and the different forms or sounds that it makes, from querulous grumbling to ranting, moaning and lamenting, muttering, groaning and sighing, to the question of tone and of volume, i.e. of the voice and emotion, of the sound, rhythm, posture and power in philosophy. Juxtaposing complaint and compliance, you mentioned the gracelessness of complaining versus the certain elegance of silent bearing, but I also sensed the implied performativity of demonstrative dissent as complaint put forward as the companion to grievance, implying melancholia, unleashes the energy of protest. All in all, a positive force, therefore, certainly one without which little progress would be thinkable, and we'd still be in the dark ages in terms of so many still unfolding emancipations, many of which have come at least some way in a generation or two, grâce et merci aux protestations. In reading through and hearing your talk, wondering how the hell to respond, a couple of diffuse ideas began to emerge, and I'm not sure how I can connect them. One line of thought, and it's more of a question, was that I wondered how one might complement, as in supplement, your mapping of the landscape of discontent by introducing, injecting, or calling for a space on the map for a different kind of quasi-semiotic physical exclamation. For there is, as you say, the Ach of Sprache, the Ach of Ach du Scheiße, and perhaps Friedrich Kittler was right to identify that Ach of Sprache as the original complaint. But what about the softer, more inhaled, or the Ah of a sweeter form of Sorge, the Ah of care, or the of wonder, or indeed the of enjoyment, the inhaled, fröhliche Seufzer provoked by desire, delight, délice, or pure amazement, or phew, as in French, ouf, the simple sigh of relief. So I ask, rhetorically of course, does the justification of complaint and the urgent need to protest necessarily render futile the admiration of spring daisies, or the beauty of fractals, or big orange fish? Or does the human wonder at the marvel of the world not in fact precondition, as in justify, the appropriateness of certain complaints? We know that philosophy begins in wonder. Isn't or shouldn't that wonder be the ultimate source, as in motor, originator, for the impulse to make things better? In other words, the origin of protest. At any rate, it seems to me that if the of wonder cannot trump the it can and must at least interrupt it. The multiple reasons for revolt do not disappear, but they are temporarily suspended while strength is regained in meditation or the contemplation of sweet marvel. The second line of thought is twofold. On the one hand, it concerns the question of what lies between the sweetness of wonder and the sourness of angry complaint. This is a sort of personal obsession of mine. Where is the pendulum when it moves between these two connected poles? Or what state resides between euphoria, exaltation, joy on the one hand, and angry revolt on the other? What would be the interjection that expresses neutrality? I don't think there is one in English. We have, of course, Melville's or Bartleby's I would prefer not to, but that's a whole sentence, so it doesn't count. And I can't really think of one in German either. They say, tja, but there's a sort of told you so schadenfreude in it. Or, pff, but it's dismissive, so hardly neutral. I think one has to look to French to find the perfect neutral expression, and it goes with a typical shoulder shrug. Bof. Chuffed with my aha-erlebnis, the brainwave that I would respond to Avital's first with a and then with a bof. I jogged gaily down to Humboldt University's French library on Unter den Linden to find out more about the linguistic history of the French-style shoulder shrug. But there wasn't much to be found. I was disappointed. Just a few contextualized examples from miscellaneous texts confirming the general nonplusness of my new favorite interjection. Autrement dit, tu ne trouves pas ça formidable. Or, bof, il est bon quand même ton truc, donne-le, il passera. Quoted from a certain Marie Cardinal's Les mots pour le dire. Or, pendant le déjeuner, je l'ai laissé me prendre la main. Bof, c'est quoi une main? I wasn't sure this was going to going to get me anywhere, so I dragged myself home with somewhat less spring in my stride, wishing once again that I'd chosen a different, easier professional path. But then I remembered the net, and it was, speaking of friends, I kid you not, Wiki to the rescue. Did you know that in French sociology, people born after the Génération 68, but before something like the mid-90s, are referred to as the bof generation? We are considered by the institution en place as, I quote, désabusés, incapables de trouver la passion dans un monde sans émotion, peu engagés en politique, caractérisés par un scepticisme résigné. This all brings me to the second part of my query and to the question of the timeliness or untimeliness of complaints. The complaints as were formulated in the 18th century texts and earlier that you mentioned are of course clearly different to the ones that stem from your salad days, as you say, or to the ones that drove the protest movement of the late 1960s on this very square. And different again, I would suppose, to the ones that come to us nowadays from a whole new breed of, how should we call them, overly assertive student. Or are the complaints not so different? Is there a universal complaint? What would be the particular or indeed the particular of the collection of impulses that are currently coming together here to constitute what we are beginning to call performance philosophy? And can that complaint be articulated in a way that is heard by those to whom it should be addressed? Or is it destined to be shared only amongst friends, dare I say, birds of a feather, which apparently, by the way, is the name of informal discussion groups, otherwise referred to as BOF, that take place at technology and engineering conferences. How does philosophy, and performance philosophy in particular, respond to the changes in complaint that are the result of the generational transitions that I have evoked? My generation is only just half removed from yours, Avital, and already, according to
Wait a minute.
already, according to
now it's war. I was smiling like I could take your shit. I have my limits.
Already, according to the annals of sociology, I'm not a boom baby, I'm a boff. If only someone had told me this before, it would have saved me quite some soul-searching. But then, better to be a boff, I console myself secretly in arrogance, than to be of the subsequent digital native LOL generation. At least we intuitively relate to Blanchot's notion of the neutral night as the ungraspable that you cannot free yourself from, what you cannot find and therefore cannot avoid. L'insaisissable est ce à quoi on n'échappe pas. And we can draw hope from Roland Barthes' definition of the neutral as that which outplays the paradigm. Le neutre est ce qui déjoue le paradigme and is unsellable, invendable. Perhaps Blanchot and Barthes were in fact precursors, bof avant la lettre. And perhaps there is still the promise of a revolutionary potential within the culture and cultivation of boffs. Whatever, maybe that's the English word that I'm looking for. Because according to Roland Barthes, the neutral is not devoid of passion. It takes some effort to outplay the paradigm. Déjouer le paradigme est une activité ardente, brûlante. You may hear breath of fire. And I, like the others of my generation, can still recall and am still drawn to the feel of the analog. My basic oxygen furnace during Bits of Freedom, those are both the names of video games, is off the grid in fields. There's a certain patina there, even in the lightweight category. Merci beaucoup.